So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our four-part new diagnosis workshop series. Today, for our final talk in the series, we have our joint presentation on how can a social worker, SLP, and OT help with occupational therapist Rosa Jafari, speech language pathologist Allison Haas, and social worker Elaine Book. Following the presentation, we have our 30-minute Q&A panel session with all speakers from the series present to answer your questions. Before I introduce our presenters, I'd like to go through a few housekeeping items with you. First, I want to let you know that we are recording this webinar and it will be available along with the presentation slides on our website. Secondly, you will see a chat icon at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that icon, it will open up. Feel free to use this chat box during the webinar to make any comments or questions for our speakers today. And we will have the 30-minute session following the last talk today. And please be mindful to only ask questions as only ask general questions, as these sessions are designed to provide general education and not intended for individual advice or clinical care. And finally, to optimize your experience with this webinar, please ensure that you adjust your speaker volume both on your computer as well as on your actual speaker so that you can hear the webinar well. And if you're experiencing audio issues, please ensure that you haven't pressed your mute button on your keyboard. I'd now like to welcome our three presenters today. Starting the presentation, we have Rosa Jafari. Rosa has worked as an OT since 2004. She has worked in different settings such as acute care and in the long-term care community, and with different client populations such as pediatrics, youth, adults, and older adults. She is certified in LSBT BIG. She joined the Movement Disorders Clinic at UBC in July 2021 and is committed to providing for people who live with Parkinson's. Following Rosa, we have Allison Haas speaking, and Allison graduated from UBC School of Audiology and Speech Sciences in 2010 and has worked with adults with acquired neurological speech, language, voice, and swallowing disorders ever since. And she has worked in every environment, including acute care, inpatient, rehabilitation, outpatients, community, and long-term care. And she's also certified in LSBT and Speak Out therapies and is passionate about improving quality of life for people with Parkinson's. And our final presenter today will be Elaine Book. Elaine earned her BSW from the University of Manitoba and her MSW from the University of BC, and with her thesis focusing on caregiver stress. Elaine has worked in the field of social work for over 30 years in a variety of community and hospital settings with an interest in the geriatric population. So I will pass it over to you now. Welcome all. Rosa, Elaine, and Allison, and I will pass it over to Rosa now to start off.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. And my name is Rosa, as Alana already introduced me. I would like to begin with land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that I will work on unceded territory of coastal Salish people, including the territories of Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Thanks for coming today. So I am an occupational therapist who works in movement disorder in UBC clinic. So today I just gonna give you a brief understanding about what's occupational therapy and what's my role in an allied health team in a movement disorder clinic. So occupational therapist is a member of the allied health team who focuses on function and activity of daily living. How an occupational therapist can help somebody who lives with Parkinson. So usually we see clients who live with Parkinson in all stages of the Parkinson, from diagnosis till later years that a person lives with a Parkinson. Usually patients is being referred to us with a complaint regarding their hand function, but we actually can provide a more broad consult. So regarding activity of daily living, regarding the function, So regarding energy conservation strategies, home modification, and durable medical equipment. These recommendations and suggestion is tailor-made to every person's specific needs and background, support group, living environment. So it is very specific and individualized interaction that we have with each client. After having seeing patients here for let's say an assessment session, and I provide recommendation, I usually follow up with them in a follow-up sessions, and I ask them I asked a couple of them like how our intervention or how my intervention and my suggestion was helpful for them. So some of the people can do like a simple tasks way better. So people usually have difficulties using the utensils, so they can cut their meal better. They can use your phone for texting better. They can do their transfers from surface to another surface, like a shower transfer, more confidence. Some people gain better understanding about how they can manage their energy, how can they plan their life better so they are not experiencing the crash. And then the other people can get ideas about how they can renovate their bathroom and how if they want to age in place. So you can see that like let's say the focus of the occupational therapist is very broad. So each person can get a benefit out of it in the way they need it. Usually, people ask when I can see an occupational therapist when they come to a movement disorder clinic. So I always recommend, and this is a best practice guidelines, that I will advise a person who lives with Parkinson to seek the information and ask for a service and see an OT as soon as possible. So it can be right from after diagnosis, and so that you can gain in-person idea about like how an OT can help you, considering your individual condition, your support system, your living environment, and your individual challenge. You can also, if you see an OT and you want to or come back again and you don't know how you should follow up or see a OT again, usually I recommend people, when you see you are experiencing a little bit difficulty in your function, or a regular task is becoming more challenging for you, so that's the time you would like to see an OT again, to maybe a reassessment can be done. But in generally, if you seek the information earlier, at earlier stages, it is way better, because some of the strategies and recommendations can be learned and practiced in earlier stage that you can carry forward like till later stage of the disease. So that's way easier. So like earlier, let's say, interaction is recommended. Where you can find an occupational therapist. So in movement disorder clinics, you can find an occupational therapist. Home health team also have occupational therapists, and also their private companies. But you should know that like in movement disorder clinic, an OT has more time, I would say, to, let's say, review your function and activity of daily living. In BC, our home health team is a little bit busy at the moment, so you may not they may not be able to provide the assessment regarding your function. They may be able to just provide you recommendation with like specific or critical stuff. So if you are in the early stages of the disease, I would recommend you to like get touch base with the movement disorder clinic. And so you can seek advice from the OT there, and also the other services which are available. Okay, that's my short let's say introduction about occupational therapists. Now I pass it on to Allison. Yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions. I'm gonna stop sharing now.
Okay, thanks, Rosa. Okay, thanks. Welcome. My name is Allison. I'm a speech language pathologist. So my presentation is on how can an SLP help. Let me just, okay, so just some facts. Did you know approximately 90% of people with Parkinson's will develop dysarthria during the course of the disease? Although individuals with Parkinson's themselves may be unaware of problems with spoken communication. So what is dysarthria? What is this word? Well, dysarthria arises from a reduction in mobility of movements, which is typical for Parkinson's, and it can manifest across all levels of speech production, including respiratory, phonatory, resonatory, articulatory, and prosodic systems. What does this all mean? Well, let's look at what that would sound like in somebody with Parkinson's. So voice might come across as very quiet, so low vocal volume. The voice quality could be quite hoarse or breathy because of the vocal folds not coming together typically. Changes in speech rate, so it could be really fast and blurred, or it could be unusually slow. Imprecise articulation, so kind of slurred sounding, some reduced intonation, so very flat sounding speech, very monotone, and even in some cases, some stuttering coming out. So why might people with Parkinson's not be aware of their dysarthria? So Parkinson's not only affects the motor system, but there can also be some changes in sensory processing of one's own speech, where people can't fully appreciate or recognize necessarily how their speech is sounding to others. So a typical example of, maybe a spouse and person with Parkinson's come into the clinic, and the spouse says that the person with Parkinson's is not speaking loud enough. However, the person with Parkinson's feels that they are speaking at just a normal volume. And so for impaired sensory, the person with Parkinson's actually thinks that, no, it's my spouse who potentially has a hearing problem. I feel like I'm speaking just fine. So, when you come in for an assessment or see a speech pathologist, typically a person with Parkinson's can have, we call it this aha moment, where they're recorded, they listen back to themselves, and they can fully appreciate, oh, okay, that's how I'm sounding. I actually wasn't quite aware of that. So we call this a calibration issue, where we need to recalibrate the brain. Okay, and so that's one of the goals of therapy. And I wish it was so straightforward and so simple that I could just say to you, speak louder, or speak in a stronger voice, or speak out, speak up. But it doesn't work that way. It actually takes a lot of intensive retraining to kind of make this person with Parkinson's, whose voice might be coming out soft, very soft, they kind of have to overshoot and use more effort and feel like they're speaking a bit louder in order to come out with more normal sounding loudness. And so, yeah, like I was saying, that it is possible to kind of retrain the brain, right? But it does take some work. So what are some signs that you might not have dysarthria if you're not completely able to appreciate how your speech is sounding to others? So if you need to repeat yourself a lot, when you talk, other people are not responding. You don't like to go out for coffee or see people in groups because people can't hear you with all the background noise. You go to a restaurant, you don't get what you order. You use your voice recognition, hey Siri, and you don't get what you want. Okay, so if you're starting to notice anything, Siri just went off on my phone. If you notice anything like this, I encourage you to seek out a speech pathologist as soon as possible. Because like Rosa was saying, like the sooner you can get in and address these issues, the better we can optimize and maintain a good quality of life. So just referring to Canadian guidelines for Parkinson's, we should consider speech and language therapy for people with Parkinson's who have any kind of communication, swallow, or saliva issues. And this should include strategies to improve speech and communication, such as effort therapies. So what are effort therapies? Some examples would be Lee Silverman voice therapy, so LSVT, and then there's the big version that Rosa was talking about for the big movements. And then there's also speak out therapy. So Both of these just focus on using more effort in your speech. And they can be either in the form of think loud in terms of LSVT, or using more intent when you're speaking for the speak out version. Okay, and then, again, our goal is to optimize, maintain function as good as possible for as long as possible. Eventually, there could be a need later on for alternative and augmentative communication, okay, as Parkinson's progresses or needs change. So nice thing about being in touch with a speech pathologist already is they can monitor you. If there's any need for equipment for communication assistance, such as writing systems, pointing, computers, iPads, anything like that, you can get referred to Kaya. And they do free equipment loans to people in BC who have needs for adults. Okay. And I do want to just make a quick little note here about DBS, or deep brain stimulation. So this is not always the case, but there is just potential to develop or worsen dysarthria after having deep brain stimulation. So if you have the opportunity, it's always good to consult an SLP just to get a baseline assessment maybe before you go for surgery, or if you're someone who really uses their voice or needs their voice or their speech for work and day-to-day, you're doing a lot with your voice, you might even want to consider prehab, right? So doing some kind of rehab before, if you're very concerned and you want to absolutely minimize any effects preoperatively. Okay, so moving on to more of the guidelines for communication, swallow, and saliva. In terms of swallowing, we really want to make sure we have strategies to improve safety and efficiency of swallowing and minimize any kind of risks of aspiration, such as using expiratory muscle strength training. So I'll just show you what that looks like. There's different versions of these devices. The research has basically been done with this device, EMST. And what it is, you just breathe out hard and fast through this device that provides resistance. And it's got lots of evidence. And if Alana, you want, you can put these up, but just showing improved cough strength. So, if there is any risk of aspiration, you want to make sure you have a strong cough things out. It's showed improvement for swallowing. So clearing residue, getting decreasing the risk of aspiration, and also even some improvements in drooling. So these are all very, very promising things. And I just want to mention, anytime, if you are going to do any kind of therapy for swallowing, okay, it really should be assessed with an instrumental swallow assessment with a qualified speech pathologist. So there's two types of tests you can do. The one on the left is called video fluoroscopic swallow study. And it's basically a patient swallowing liquid with barium and checking to see, and in this case, unfortunately, there is some aspiration down the front there going in towards the trachea. So, while someone can watch you eat and drink, we can really only definitively rule out aspiration by doing a test like this. And then same with this one here, FEES, it's fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing. Again, it's done just in an SLP office. It's similar to an ear, nose, throat doctor where you have the little camera, goes through your nose, sits at the top of your throat while you eat and drink. And they can visualize that with the camera in place as you eat and drink. So those would be what you want to have as your baseline swallow study. Again, we're looking for safety. Is there any aspiration? We're looking, so material going into the airway. Efficiency, is there any residue left in the throat after swallowing? They can give you recommendations for strategies at your meal. So for example, some people, it works to tuck their chin to prevent aspiration of liquids, right? Again, you can only do this with a swallow study. You should never have anyone just tell you, yep, just tuck your chin without having this done. Okay, so that's why I want to make this all clear to you now. They can give you recommendations to guide some therapy. And as a last resort, you may be given some ideas for modifying the diet in terms of textures, easier textures. The good news about speech and voice exercises is that, it's all this area here. So what's good for your speech and voice is also good for helping strengthen your swallow. So you kind of get extra bang for your buck by doing your exercises. And again, just to reiterate what Rosa said, early intervention is absolutely the best. Don't delay. If you notice some issues starting to come up, don't ignore it. Try to seek out therapy as soon as possible to optimize your function, maintain quality of life. So we say use it and improve it, use it or lose it. All right. So in summary, your voice is important, your speech is important, your swallow is important to day-to-day things, socializing, employment, expressing wants, needs, wishes. So if you have the opportunity to seek out SLP, I definitely recommend. And then there's some resources from Parkinson's Society of BC, as well as Parkinson's Foundation that you may or may not know of. Yeah, and I think we're saving questions till the end. So I'll let Elaine take over now for social work.
Thank you, Allison. And I love that term prehab, because it's just, I think it spans across all of the disciplines, and just is really this proactive approach, which is what you're all doing by joining this webinar today. So I'm just going to share my screen and talk about the social work role. So oftentimes when people hear that they're being referred to the social worker, or you should speak to the social worker, sometimes a couple of messages instantly come into mind, which is, oh, I don't have any financial issues, I don't really need to see a social worker. Or, oh my gosh, they want me to talk to the social worker, there must be something really wrong. And I'm kind of here to dispel those myths. Certainly we do play a role at those times, but there's a lot of other stuff that we do as well. So in essence, the social worker provides information, counseling, and referral to people in order to help them to understand, adjust, and manage the emotional, the social, and the practical concerns that might arise as a result of Parkinson's disease. And so emotional and social support might refer to the impact of the illness, the non-motor and the motor symptoms on work, on family, on lifestyle. It might be about loss and grief. It can be about work, making decisions about work, communication issues, anxiety, depression, the care partner. Those kinds of things are things that fall under the emotional and social support. Referrals and resource navigation, certainly pensions and disability benefits, home support services, housing, legal, respite, support groups, all of that sort of stuff. And under education, really, PD education knowledge is king. And so really imparting some of that education and normalizing the experience, sharing useful websites and webinars and books and general education around coping. So this is really an overview of the roles so that over time you have an understanding going forward what you might tap into the social worker for. But I want to focus just on a few areas that I tend to most frequently address with people who are newly diagnosed. So the topics are here that I'm going to kind of address this afternoon. So starting with disclosure. So, the decision to discuss or not discuss the diagnosis is really an individual choice. Some people don't want others to know about it, don't want to be labeled for having an illness, for fear that they may be treated differently by family or friends or colleagues. But bear in mind that those who are near and dear to you may have already noticed or might be aware of some of the changes in you. And so sometimes it's valuable to let them know that the changes in your mood or in your behavior or in your physical activity or work performance are changes for a very legitimate reason, because otherwise sometimes people may start to make some incorrect assumptions about you. And also it may actually feel good to share some of your concerns with someone else and to receive support. So Parkinson's disease can certainly affect your work. For those of you who are on the call who might still be working, depending on the severity of your symptoms, the progression of the illness, and the demands of your work. So some people, continue to work, but are mindful of changes that they might need to make in their duties or their hours. Others make the decision not to work because their jobs are too physically demanding or are too stressful. And certainly finances are a consideration here, but there's also this emotional piece that's attached to work and what work means to you. So work might provide a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment and keeping joy in your life. And all of those things are important as well. So, when to tell your employer, again, a very personal decision. And you might want to kind of take into consideration, again, the management of symptoms, your job, your status in the workplace, the nature of your relationships at work, and ultimately, though, most do agree that the sooner you tell your employer, your support network, the better it will be in the long run. And so here are some tips for disclosure of the diagnosis in really any of the contexts that you might need to navigate. And you are all going to have access to these slides. So just in the interest of time, I'll just leave that slide with you. So anxiety is another topic that comes up a lot with people when they are newly diagnosed. And as you may have heard in some of the previous parts of this series, there's medications that can be used to manage anxiety, but also strategies. And certainly when you start taking medications 2 and 3 times a day, the last thing you really want to do is take more medication. And so there are a variety of other non-medicinal strategies that you can look at to try and manage anxiety. However, what I would say is that if the anxiety is such that you can't employ these other strategies, that's where this kind of 2-pronged approach can be helpful. So maybe you take a little something in order to manage the anxiety such that you can then employ a strategy like meditation or mindfulness or exercise. If the anxiety is getting in the way so she can't even do those other non-medicinal strategies, then it might be a good time. Cognitive behavioral therapy, otherwise known as CBT, has been very effective for people. And I do have resources listed at the end as to how you can access some cognitive behavioral therapy. And there's recently a book, probably about 2 years ago now, called Good Anxiety by Wendy Suzuki. And, she really says we can't get rid of anxiety, but we can learn how to worry well. And so she offers these 3 steps as to how to start managing anxiety by really turning down the volume on our anxiety with things like breath work and meditation and working on your attitude and exercise. And the other thing she talks about is really exploring those uncomfortable emotions that you might have, that with worry or fear or grief. And what do those strong emotions, what are they telling you? And then kind of use the superpowers of anxiety. So channel the energy that you have into action and turn the what ifs into a to-do list. So turn anxiety into action. And so these strategies that I've shared are really proactive strategies, things that you can do in advance in order to manage anxiety in general. But there's also that sudden onset anxiety that's a non-motor symptom with Parkinson's disease. So, you're going about your day, you're at the grocery store, the line is getting long, you're kind of looking at your watch because you're due for your next medication, and you might start to getting anxious. And so there are a lot of simple strategies that you can use to manage anxiety in the heat of the moment, and things that can be done at any time. And I've attached a nice long list at the end, so you can take a peek at that. So depression, again, very common in people with Parkinson's. And as you probably heard in the previous talks, that, depression can be part of the chemical imbalance and the changes in the brain as a result of the Parkinson's, but it's also a reaction to having a new diagnosis of a neurological condition. And so here I've just listed some of the signs of depression. And I've listed them because sometimes people don't recognize these as being signs of depressions or don't recognize that they are depressed. Similar to anxiety, using a combination of medication and coping strategies can be very effective. But I do kind of want to say just a piece about stigma because, sometimes people might not want to acknowledge that they're experiencing anxiety and depression because of the stigma attached to that. But truly, again, a common theme that we're hearing today is that the sooner you start to address something, so the sooner you start to address the symptoms of depression and anxiety, the sooner you will also feel better. So, going from being a well individual to someone with a chronic progressive condition, it's major, and it's an ongoing transition with a variety of feelings and emotions like fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, loss, and grief. And all of these feelings are really quite valid and quite normal and are also very different for everybody and really do shift over time as well. And so how you manage these feelings really impacts how well you manage the Parkinson's disease. And loss and grief are often not talked about within the context of a health condition. And so I really just kind of want to take a moment to give them a bit of attention because really when we name an emotion or an experience or a feeling, it can be quite enlightening, it can be quite freeing, and it's how we then work through it. So grief is not bad. In fact, it's actually considered to be a healthy process that really leads us to acceptance and to adjustment. Grieving is how we get over things and how we move on. So I encourage you to take some time to think about any losses that you may have experienced with the diagnosis and how you've addressed them. And, again, having that awareness and insight into how and why you are feeling something just brings the ability to respond rather than to react. So Parkinson's disease is a family affair. I often say to people with Parkinson's, when I'm meeting with them for the first time, I said, yes, you are our patient, but it's actually not all about you. And to the caregiver, I kind of say, you're an important part of this as well, and your needs need to be addressed as well. So I don't know whether or not there are any care partners in the room or any of the people who are on the call right now have care partners, but this is a few moments for them. And really recognizing that receiving support as a caregiver really allows you to then bring the energy that's needed into the caring relationship. Now, at this stage, many of you may not be providing hands-on help, and the effects on you as the care partner, whether you're a friend or a spouse or a sibling, those effects might be more subtle, like the general concerns that I have listed there. But also be mindful that the reaction to the diagnosis might be quite similar to the person with Parkinson's. So there may be shock, there may be anxiety, there may be worry and fear for the future. So recognize that the impact of a diagnosis can strain any relationship. And communication is really critical throughout the illness. And I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute. But there is a lot of material available to support caregivers in their role. Again, resources at the end. Really, the strength and resilience that people show in some situations and the ability to adapt is quite amazing and quite inspiring. But it is definitely a balancing act and one that requires compromise. So looking at what is best for the person with Parkinson's and also taking into consideration the needs of the caregiver. So just to follow up on that comment I made about communication, I talk a lot about communication with people in this stage, really recognizing that it's challenging to be honest around sensitive feelings of fear for the future, especially if that's not the type of relationship that you had in the past. It's new territory for some people. that these are not insurmountable kinds of issues and can really often any challenges that you might be having in communication can often be helped and nipped in the bud with the support of a counselor, or even with some self-help activities and resources in order to again work together, communication with that you and I. So it's you and I together. That is my piece on care partners. So self-management, now is really the time to embrace this concept of self-management, this idea of taking responsibility for managing aspects of your health and well-being, which is what you're doing today by attending this webinar and learning about Parkinson's disease. So here is kind of a self-management to-do list, as well as things that I wish I knew, that was created by Dr. Sonia Mathur, who is a young onset person with Parkinson's. She's also a physician as well. And this was a list that she presented at World Parkinson's Congress a number of years ago, which was the things that she wished she knew when she got diagnosed. So whenever I talk about coping, I always seem to talk about hope as well. And it's interesting that these words are connected by rhyme, but I also really do believe that they're connected as somebody who is able to maintain hope is able to cope well as well. You know, hope is not about endless positivity or optimism. It's really, hope gives us the courage to confront our circumstances and recognize the capacity that we have to surmount them. Viktor Frankl, well-known book, Man's Search for Meaning, where he says, if you know, he really talks about the importance of meaning in life. And if you have a why, then you can cope with any how. This idea of joy, I really want to stress the importance of incorporating joy as a practice in life. That idea that if you create and practice and identify joy, and it becomes a well-ingrained practice, it can really help manage any crises that inevitably come along in life. And so the author of this book called The Light Maker's Manifesto, her name is Karen Walrund, she says, ask yourself these questions, these 3 questions every day. How can I feel connected today? How can I feel healthy today? How can I feel purposeful today? Because I think in trying times, joy is often the first activity that we tend to let go of. And so I encourage you to be intentional about incorporating joyful activities into your day. Where you can find social work support, the Movement Disorders Clinics, Parkinson's Society BC also has counselors. There's a website, counselingbc.com, BC Association of Social Workers, and certainly private agencies like healthcare navigating agencies, and I've listed a few there. And then the remainder of the slides, and I believe as Alana said, you'll have access. It's all just good stuff to click on. And there we go.